Archer breaking Star Trek rules is what made Scott Bakula's Enterprise Captain great. Captain Archer's behavior in Star Trek Enterprise's premiere set the tone for what the prequel was meant to be. Archer decided to launch the Anxo Enterprise to bring a Klingon named Klong, Tiny Lister, the first Klingon humans ever met, back to his homeworld, Konos. Jonathan and Enterprise's crew soon learned that Klong was the target of a race called the Suliban. Enterprise journeys to Rigel X, encountering a menagerie of aliens for the first time. Archer later leaves T'Pol in command of Enterprise as he chases after the Suliban named Silic, John Fleck, before he successfully delivers Klong to the Klingons. Enterprise was defined by Captain Archer's inexperience, choices, wins, and mistakes, and his humanity was reflected by his crew. Archer was designed to be less refined than Captain Kirk and less patient than Captain Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart. But Jonathan was also affable, generous, and driven by an impulse to explore and offer help when needed, even if it was ill-advised or could put Enterprise in jeopardy. Since Jonathan was retconned as the first captain of the Enterprise, Archer provided the model for future captains of what to do and what not to do. This makes Captain Jonathan Archer fascinating and great in the larger context of Star Trek. T'Pol brought traditional Star Trek to Enterprise. Captain Archer and the Anxo Enterprise might not have survived their first mission or their continuing journey in Star Trek Enterprise Season 1 without Subcommander T'Pol. The Vulcan science officer was initially a reluctant member of Captain Archer's crew, who was meant to be on temporary loan. However, T'Pol's function in Enterprise's series premiere was to represent the traditional form of Star Trek, to guide and be the Vulcan opposition Archer's rough-around-the-edges crew would rebel against. T'Pol had the knowledge, patience, and experience in deep space that Captain Archer lacked, which made the Vulcan essential to Enterprise. One of the joys of watching Star Trek Enterprise's 4 seasons is seeing how T'Pol's loyalties shift to Captain Archer and his crew, and vice versa. Star Trek Enterprise too often exploited Jolene Blalock's sex appeal and undermined the Vulcan's agency, but at her best, T'Pol was crucial to Enterprise's journey and the maturation of Captain Archer and his crew into experienced space explorers. Star Trek Enterprise's premiere and the series that followed is the literal blueprint of how Starfleet captains evolved from the standard Captain Archer established with his mistakes and his victories. When Scott Bakula was cast as Captain Jonathan Archer in Star Trek Enterprise, fans had high expectations for him to uphold the Federation ideals established by predecessors like Captain Kirk and Captain Picard. However, what ultimately made Archer an exceptional captain was his willingness to break those very Star Trek rules. His defiance of strict moral codes and deviation from the traditional Starfleet handbook humanized him and breathed new life into the franchise. By embracing a rougher, more conflicted leadership style, Archer's character stood out as a significant force in shaping the future of Starfleet, both in universe and from a storytelling perspective. The weight of a pre-Federation era, the premise of Enterprise set it apart from other Star Trek series by taking place in the pre-Federation era. This gave Archer a unique challenge, as Starfleet was in its infancy and there were no well-defined rules to follow. The Prime Directive, the cornerstone of Federation diplomacy that forbids interference in the natural development of alien civilizations, did not yet exist. This lack of a guiding ethical compass allowed Archer more freedom, but also placed him in uncharted territory, forcing him to make decisions without the benefit of established protocols. Unlike Kirk or Picard, who had decades of Federation history to draw from, Archer often found himself making decisions on instinct and moral judgment. His leadership was not the flawless, principled ideal of later captains. It was raw, fallible, and sometimes reckless. But it was precisely this roughness that made him so compelling. He was a pioneer, navigating a frontier where mistakes had enormous consequences. His character broke Star Trek's well-worn rules, not out of rebellion, but out of necessity, reflecting the real challenges of exploration and the growing pains of humanity as it reached out into the galaxy. Challenging the idealized Starfleet image, Archer's decisions often ran counter to the clean-cut, almost utopian image of Starfleet seen in previous Star Trek iterations. Throughout Enterprise, viewers see a captain who struggles with issues that push the boundaries of Star Trek's well-established rules of engagement. For example, during the Xindi arc in Season 3, Archer is forced to take morally questionable actions to prevent the annihilation of Earth. These actions include torturing a prisoner for information and stealing a warp coil from an innocent ship to continue his mission. These are decisions that would have been unthinkable for someone like Picard, who always sought a peaceful, diplomatic solution. However, Archer's willingness to engage in morally gray areas highlights his determination and the reality of leading in a time before Starfleet had the luxury of following a strict code of conduct. This willingness to bend the rules and sometimes break them was not without consequence. Archer faced personal guilt, moments of doubt, and conflict with his crew over these decisions. Yet this was part of what made his leadership resonate. He embodied a more realistic, human portrayal of leadership, one that included mistakes and ethical dilemmas. His struggles made the stakes feel more authentic and higher than the neatly wrapped-up solutions of some other Star Trek captains. A captain on the frontier, a crucial part of Archer's character was his role as a pioneer. Unlike Kirk or Picard, who had the luxury of following Starfleet's established norms, Archer was breaking ground for future captains. His mission was not just about exploration, but also about establishing humanity's place in the galaxy. This pioneering spirit made Archer's defiance of rules almost inevitable. He was carving a new path for Starfleet, defining how humanity would interact with new civilizations, some of which had never even heard of Earth. Without the Prime Directive or even a clear sense of the Federation's eventual ideals, Archer was forced to rely on his own moral compass, a compass that was occasionally flawed, but always rooted in a deep sense of responsibility. Episodes like Damage in Season 3 highlight Archer's internal conflict and the heavy toll his decisions took on him. In that episode, Archer chooses to take the warp coil from an innocent alien ship to save Earth from the Xindi superweapon. He acknowledges that his actions could leave the aliens stranded for years, but he is willing to make that sacrifice. This action goes against everything Star Trek typically stood for: respect for other species, peaceful coexistence, and non-interference. But Archer's situation was different. The stakes were higher, the rules less defined. His willingness to cross ethical lines in dire situations made him more relatable and grounded. Shaping Starfleet's future in many ways, Archer's rule-breaking laid the foundation for the Starfleet we see in later Star Trek series. His experiences and the lessons he learned became part of the collective wisdom that would eventually inform the creation of the Prime Directive and other key Federation policies. Archer's journey wasn't about upholding pre-existing ideals, but rather about creating them through trial and error. His leadership reflected the reality of building something new, messy, fraught with mistakes, but ultimately successful. Bakula's portrayal of Captain Archer helped humanize Star Trek by presenting a flawed, imperfect leader who wasn't bound by the rigid moral certainty of later captains. Archer broke the rules not out of carelessness or arrogance, but because his circumstances demanded it. His actions, while controversial, contributed to the richness and complexity of Enterprise. Making the show more than just a prequel, it became a meditation on what it means to lead in times of uncertainty. By embracing imperfection, Archer became one of Star Trek's most interesting captains, showing that rule-breaking, when done for the right reasons, can be the key to greatness. Archer became one of Star Trek's most interesting captains, showing that rule-breaking, when done for the right reasons, can be the key to greatness.